What's going on, everyone? Jeremy here from the quartering, and we do have the black box flight recorder from the doomed passenger flight in DC. Some interesting new information there, as well as the flight recorder from the Black Hawk helicopter that also shed some light on it. Very interesting stuff. Now, again, could this be an instrument issue? Sure. I also want to point out that the military withholding this woman's name until now doesn't necessarily mean anything was suspicious, but it does beg the question, how come only her name? How come only her name was withheld? The other two military folks that lost their life in that crash were not withheld. None of the passengers of the jet were withheld. So it's very interesting. Let's talk about the pilot, though. So Hero pilots made last-ditch bid to save the doomed American Airlines jet seconds before everything happened.
I'll tell you
Here.
at one point very close to the pitch. That is something that we will get you more detail on, but it was an indication of an increase in pitch.
Thank you, Todd Grady, Triple with the Box. So are you also saying that there was a 100-foot discrepancy between what the air traffic controller was seeing?
So they're saying, is there a 100-foot discrepancy?
And what the height, the altitude of the plane? There was a 100 feet difference?
So the question is, was there a 100 feet difference between what we found the plane to be operating at and the air traffic control tower? I'm saying the initial data we have on the control tower cab says 200 feet would have been visualized. This is a fairly good estimate, but it needs to be finalized. I shouldn't say estimate. It's a fairly good initial read. It needs to be finalized. And again, the CRJ was operating at 325
That's
feet.
the plane.
Plus or minus 25.
And how common is it that the two aircraft would be operating on different frequencies with the same control tower?
The question is how common would it be that the two aircraft would be operating on separate frequencies? It is completely common.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about military jets. So this says, the hero pilots of the doomed American Airlines plane made a last-ditch bid to try and save their passengers just moments before the incident. Captain Jonathan Campos and First Officer Samuel Lilly tried to pull the plane's nose up just a few seconds before the incident. Preliminary data from the plane's flight recorder has now revealed. At one point, very close impact, there was a slight increase in pitch. An increase in pitch, means that they basically try to pull up. Data from the flight recorder showed its altitude at 325 feet, plus or minus 25 feet, when the incident happened, Inman told reporters, but data on the control tower showed the Black Hawk at 200 feet. Now, we do know that the control tower had told the Black Hawk several times to provide visual separation, to move away, to provide additional distance. So I don't know how this, the air traffic control clearly knew that they were flying too high. So the fact that it was showing at 200 feet, that actually doesn't match the footage that we've seen where it shows it at 300 feet. So I'm not exactly sure how that squares. Now, there's a complex investigation. Investigator in charge of Bryce Banning said there are a lot of pieces here. Banning said that the jet's cockpit voice recorder captured sound moments before the crash. The crew had a verbal reaction. Obviously, I'm sure they did. Banning said the flight data recorder showed the airplane beginning to increase in pitch. Sound of impacts were audible, and 1 second later, followed by the end of the recording. I'm sure their response was something like, oh my God, or holy, whatever. I mean, obviously they're going to have a reaction, and then interestingly here, black box jet recorder from DC helicopter and plane wreckage reveal key altitude readings that explain the crash. Data recovered from American Airlines, the National Transport Safety Board, revealed that prelim data from the Black Hawk helicopter and passenger jet showed conflicting readings about their altitudes at the time of the incident. Data from the passenger jet's flight recorder showed it at 325 feet, plus or minus 25. Data from the control tower showed the helicopter at 200 feet, The 100-foot discrepancy is yet to be explained, but the impact did occur at 325 feet. The crash would have occurred well above the maximum allowed altitude of 200 feet for helicopters in the area. Investigators hope to reconcile the altitude differences with the data from the helicopter's black box, which is taking more time to retrieve because it's waterlogged after it plunged in the Potomac River. They said they plan to refine the tower data, which can be less reliable. What our job is to figure that out. So the tower data can be less reliable. So ultimately, it may come that the transponder data or the data on the helicopter from the black box will say, yes, it was in fact 325 feet. I don't know. Obviously not good. He acknowledged that there was a dissension with the investigation team about whether or not to release information and wait till they have more data. Investigators currently do not have the readout from the Black Hawk, so they can maintain so they cannot provide information about the altitude which the helicopter was flying. But Inman said, obviously the impact occurred, and I would say when an impact occurs, that is typically where the altitude of the both craft are at that moment. No one survived the collision, as occurred at the American Airlines from Wichita, Kansas. Of course, talking about sounds of impact, so you could hear everything happen at the same time. I will never play that. I don't care if it becomes available. That's too dark. That's simply too dark. It will be quite interesting to see if we get more data here. But I mean, ultimately, we know that the helicopter was just too high. You can see in USA Today writing this: Black Hawk helicopter's altitude at issue. Families of crash victim want answers. Yeah, 68 families are probably pretty upset with not just the student pilot, but the flight instructor on that helicopter and basically everyone involved, because this is obviously you have almost every accident shouldn't have happened. But, in the terms of things that shouldn't have happened, this really shouldn't have happened. You could see just before the impact, they had a verbal reaction. This says, air traffic control staffing at Washington, D.C. the night of the crash wasn't normal. Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy confirmed Sunday. What was happening inside the tower? Were they understaffed? He said. CNN State of the Union. I mean, ultimately, when you listen to the call, they may have been understaffed, but they certainly warned the helicopter multiple times, and the helicopter did acknowledge it. Family members of those who passed were bused Sunday with police escort to a site near where the plane and helicopter fell. Photos from the scene show a long line of police motorcades, motorcycles, and police peering in out over the river. An impromptu memorial with flowers, stuffed animals, and photos of those who did not survive that day. Inman, speaking to the families who were taken to the river, said families are mad or angry. Some just want to cry. They're all hurt, he said. They still want answers, and we want to give them answers. Here is what the helicopter was actually doing. The helicopter was on a training mission that is set to mimic evacuating high-value United States leaders out of Washington, D.C. Some of their mission is to support the Department of Defense. It's really bad. Happens in this kind of area. They have to move people out. NTSB, needs to get back, basically, on all of this. I mean, to me, it's the part of this crash is very simple. The helicopter, if the helicopter was sub 200 feet, this never would have happened. At that speed, at that height, at 300 miles an hour or whatever, however fast the plane was going, maybe only 100 miles an hour because it was on final approach or whatever, you're not moving that bird. You can't really move things. Here's an expert in aviation says this. Talking about there's been an increasing amount of close calls between aircrafts. This is known, in particular at DC. What was going to come out of this? I don't know. Again, anyone who's piloted an aircraft will tell you 100 feet in the air is not 100 feet on the ground. Yes, 100 feet would be potentially made all the difference in the world, as the jet would have passed over safely. The helis lift would have been drastically altered if the plane passed 100 feet over the top props. You get some dirty air. That's true. Maybe we'd only talking about the heli crash versus both. Regardless, it should never have come down to barely a miss of 100 feet. Yeah, everybody on the crew member of that helicopter, nobody noticed. So, are we going to find out that the helicopter itself had some sort of, faulty equipment? I don't know that answer. I suspect they will blame it on that. Why were they hiding the woman's information from that flight? The student pilot. I still don't know that answer. And quite frankly, I think we deserve one. I don't think that it really makes a lot of sense to be protecting her because she's at the end of the day, she was the pilot in charge and she caused this accident. And until information disagrees and tells me, oh, it was an equipment issue or whatever, that's what we know. And I guess we'll see from the transponder from the Blackhawk helicopter. Maybe we'll get that tomorrow. But right now, visually, everything's pretty obviously pointing towards pilot error. Why the Army was running cover for her, I'll never know. I hope you were informed by this video, though. If you were, please do leave a like on it. If you haven't yet, subscribe or follow down below, and we'll talk to you again real soon.